Hi, welcome back to the Finley Formation. This is Brandon.
And this is Jared.
All right, today we're going to continue on with the Broncos for our team history and team break and offseason breakdown. This they are pick number 21? No, number
20.
20.
20,
Number
yep.
20. And we've been doing this in the reverse order, draft order from 32 to 1. So if you're just joining us on YouTube, you're probably wondering where the our first 8 teams that we did are at. So 32 through I want to say 23 are going to be on Podbean. You're going to find that on our podcast. Those were just audio only. We did them on Podbean. You can find it anywhere basically that you're going to find where you listen to podcasts at. And so if your team was anywhere from 32 to 23, then that's probably where you're going to find those, or even 22. Sorry, that's where you're going to find those ones. But yeah. So now we're on to the Broncos at pick number 20. And the Broncos were established in 1960, and so they're 65 years old. They have Broncos have won 3 Super Bowls, won 8 conference championships, 15 division championships, and they've been to the playoffs 23 times in 65 years. So that's not great. Thing is about them is, again, I think we had it with the Steelers. They were not a great pre-merger team, and neither were the Broncos. In fact, they were pretty terrible. They were the only AFL team to never play in a title game, so they were pretty crappy for the 10 years that they were there, and didn't really get better until about 1973 when they broke out of that. But they played. I'll come back to that one. They played at Hilltop Stadium, which I think is just another name for Mile High, but then became Mile High, and then they built a new stadium, and now it's Empower Field at Mile High. So Pat Bowlen was one of their prominent owners. He was the owner from 1984 to 2019, and now from 2022 till now, it's Rob Walton and Greg Penner. As I was saying, they were pretty crappy up until about 1973. And that's when they got John Ralston as a coach and gave them their first winning season in 1973, and they went 7-5-2. Still, obviously, not enough to get into the playoffs, but they did eventually get in the playoffs with I think he was a defensive coordinator, Red Miller, who became a coach, or their head coach, and that's when they had the Orange Crush defense,
Ooh,
which I've heard of that. They were
yeah.
pretty good. I like the name because fitting. But they went 12-2. They made their first playoff, and that was in 1977. And that they made it all the way to the Super Bowl there, but they were defeated by the Cowboys. And so I want to say that was Super Bowl. What would 77 be? That would be like Super Bowl
We just did the
18.
Packers. When the Packers win their first Super Bowl, what year was that? 67?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, so it would have been.
Super Bowl around. What year did it say? 77?
Yeah.
10 or 11, somewhere in there,
Yeah.
probably, for Super Bowl.
Okay. But yeah. And then in 1981, this is where things really started to turn around. This is when they got Dan Reeves as coach. And he was their coach from 1981 to 1992. He in 1983, they traded for John Elway. I know a lot of people don't realize that John Elway was not drafted by the Broncos. He was actually drafted by the Colts. It was another the first Eli Manning incident, really. So John Elway was drafted by the Baltimore Colts. He said he would not play for the Colts, didn't want to play for them. But he had more prospects than what Eli did. John Elway was also drafted by the Yankees, play center field and pitching prospect. So he said, "I'll just go play baseball." But then they traded the rights to him to the Broncos because that was on the list of teams he would play for if he went to the NFL. And so from there, I mean, they got pretty good up until they got John Elway. They had 24 different starting quarterbacks in 23 seasons.
Jeez.
So they really couldn't shore that up until they got John Elway. And him and Dan Reeves were together for 12 years. They won, well, I can't say that. I guess it wasn't 12 years together, but Dan Reeves was there for 12 years. And he won 5 division championships, 3 AFC championships, and made it to the Super Bowl 3 times. And all of those were with John Elway, the Super Bowl ones. Unfortunately, they were terrible in the 80s when it come to the Super Bowls. Late 80s with John Elway, it was bad. They lost to the Giants in Super Bowl 21, 39-20. In Super Bowl 22, they lost to the Redskins, and yes, they were the Redskins at that time. And they lost 42-10 to the Redskins. And then in Super Bowl 24, they lost to the Niners 55-10. So yeah, they were getting there. They just weren't able to do any good when they got to the Super Bowls. They didn't just lose; they they lost bad. 1995, they got Mike Shanahan. He was their coach from 95 to '08, and big draft that he had, a big draft pick in 1996. He drafted Terrell Davis, and then that immediately paid dividends the next year. They won Super Bowl 32 in 1997 over the Packers 31-24. I remember watching that game. That was
Mhm.
crazy. Terrell Davis just took over.
Was that the John Elway helicopter
Yep.
game too when he was diving for a first down or the end zone, one of the two? I just
Yeah.
remember him getting helicoptered.
Get helicopter because he really had a bad game.
He did,
Like
yeah.
it wasn't a good game.
Yep.
But he didn't have any. He had an interception. Didn't have a lot of passing yards
Mhm.
or no touchdowns, but that just one rushing touchdown, which
Yep.
was iconic. But Davis was the Super Bowl MVP that year, and then 1998 they repeated as Super Bowl champions against the Falcons, and another game that I thought was actually probably going to go in the Falcons' way, but Broncos handled them pretty clear. It was 34-19, and that game John Elway showed who he really is, and he ended up being Super
Mhm.
Bowl champion. He had a hell of a game. So then after that season, John Elway retired. So they kind of went into this quarterback spiral again. And I didn't write them all down, but I mean, there's a lot of them. You had Jay Cutler, you had Brian Greasy, you had
Jake Plummer
Jake
was in there.
Plummer was in
Mhm.
there. They Drew Lock later on. They just went through a lot of different quarterbacks. They couldn't find anything solid, couldn't find anything to stick with, and even as much as like the last not even last season, but the season before, they even tried Russell Wilson, signed him to a
Mhm.
pretty big contract. I think they even traded for him too, or was it just a big
No, they
contract?
they traded for him.
They did,
Yep.
right? And then, but then they got John Fox, 2011 to 2014, and he had a huge signing. Signed one of the greatest of all time quarterbacks again, Peyton Manning. Huge contract. I think it was like 3 years, 90 million, something like that, which was huge for the
Mhm.
time. And
His situation kind of reminded me when we were talking about Drew Brees, or not Drew Brees. Yeah, Drew Brees.
mhm,
Last episode with San Diego Chargers.
yep,
With the shoulder injury, about how a lot of teams didn't want to touch him. Kind of remind me. I mean, it wasn't necessarily the same thing because Peyton Manning had the neck injury, but I think a lot of teams were out there kind of trying to court Peyton Manning to come back. He went overseas and did like the stem cells in his neck and everything, but
mhm,
I mean, which led to Indianapolis drafting Andrew Luck because I think the Colts still had Peyton Manning on their team,
right,
but that season that he set out, which gave them the first overall pick, and then after that, they kind of let him
yep,
go out in free agency. So it wasn't necessarily as teams were concerned with his neck injury as they were Drew Brees' shoulder, but
right.
it was still pretty serious because he was a little bit older in his
Oh yeah,
career, and then he came back and broke every passing record there is known to
right,
mankind
right.
after that season. It was crazy.
Yep. Yeah, and yeah, he came in 2012, and that led to two Super Bowl appearances. One of them was a loss, which was a terrible. I mean, that game from the get go, it was a bad snap, and I remember that it was Super Bowl 48, and that was a loss to the Seahawks, 43-8. And then I think it was the next season where you were just talking about where they ended up beating the Panthers.
hmm
And I think it was that season where he broke all the records, and that was Super Bowl 50, I
I think it
believe.
was the year before because I remember the Super Bowl with the Seahawks. The big talk going into that Super Bowl was the number one offense versus the number one defense. I was with like the Legion of Boom,
Okay.
and it was like which team's gonna
Oh, okay.
who's gonna prevail.
So it
Is a
was that year.
yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay.
the year that they won the Super Bowl, Peyton Manning, that was his last year playing. But
Mhm.
I just remember like the second half of his season, he wasn't very good. I
Right.
I don't remember.
They had a quarterback start for like the last 6 games
Yeah,
of the season.
and I don't think he had that good of a Super Bowl. Yeah, 13
Okay.
out of 23 for 141 yards and an INT.
Mhm.
So I think it was just that year that they had the really good defense with Von Miller and everybody else. Because I
Right.
think Von Miller had was it the scoop and score
Yeah.
in
Oh,
that
yeah.
Super Bowl?
I think he had like 5 sacks or
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah, he was a Super Bowl
Hmm.
MVP, I think. Yeah, that was a hell of a game. So, yeah, and then that was their last Super Bowl appearance was against the Panthers where they demolished them, and that was with when the Panthers had Cam Newton and all
Hmm.
that. So, and they demolished them. So, I mean, their history up until now, they've gone through a few different coaches, and right now they're ended up with Gary Payton. And it does seem like now they just drafted Bo Nix, so it kind of seems like maybe they've got a little bit more again on the quarterback stability because he does seem like he had a good rookie year,
Hmm.
and he does seem like he's gonna be pretty good. So hopefully, because even after Peyton Manning, it's been quarterback again, going through quarterbacks, and then maybe now they've found some stability there. Gary Payton seems like he's got this program in the right direction. They made the playoffs last season, so all right. So more notable players is what I have down. Notable players, obviously, you got John Elway. He's arguably one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. Well, he's not. I mean, that's without argument. Some people would argue that he's the greatest, I guess. But and then you got to throw Rod Smith in there. Huge receiver. He was kind of like reliable, like Mister Reliable for
Hmm.
them. I threw some like Steve Atwater, Mecklenburg, Terrell Davis, Shannon Sharp, Peyton Manning, Von Miller, Ed McCaffrey was a stud.
Hmm.
Floyd Little, I don't know much about him. I think he was a running back when they in the '60s
Yeah.
and started going. So Tony Dorsett was the name that came up. Willie Brown, Champ Bailey was really good there. He was part of that trade for what was that running back's name?
So he went to the Redskins, right?
Yeah,
Man, I can picture him too.
yeah, I can see his face.
Yeah.
I just can't think of his name. We'll think of it. And then John Lynch played a few years there and had some pretty good years there. And then I put Jay Cutler just because he was a top pick for the Broncos. And then the Bears traded at least one number one, maybe
Hmm.
two number one picks for him later on. And he never really, I mean, the guy could sling the ball, but he never really, really panned out.
Yeah.
So I put him in there. I know he's not one of the greats, but he's definitely a big name. And yeah, so that's why I have for some big names, Jason Elam. I don't know if I said that or not, but uh, he was one of their all time. He was their kicker for
Hmm.
like 13
Seems
seasons.
like it. Yeah.
Yeah.
One name you forgot to mention was Tim Tebow.
Oh yeah, the Tebow. Yeah, that experiment there,
Yep.
that fluke of a season where they won like 8 in a row,
They won
and
a
everybody's
playoff
like,
game.
"Heck yeah!"
Yep.
And then they fell flat, and he just never really
Mm-mm. I think he
hell
kind of
of
bounced around.
yeah hell of a guy. I think he even tried to play tight end, but that didn't work out for him
No, I
either.
don't
So,
think so.
but yeah. So I know you got the stats. Their career stats are, I guess I should say, franchise leading stats.
Yeah, so obviously John Elway, passing leader. He played from 83 to 98, so 234 games that he played for the Broncos, 51,475 yards, 300 touchdowns. He did have 226 INTs, so I mean that's kind of what I remember him. John Elway was like one of the first quarterbacks I remember, like him and Dan Marino in that era of just like gunslingers.
Hmm.
I mean, they could just throw the ball anywhere on the field. They could be at one hash and throw it across the field. And it was like just the big time arm
Oh yeah,
quarterbacks, or in the early 80s or
yeah,
early to late 80s. You just didn't really see that before
no,
with quarterbacks. And so
right,
that's what I remember about Elway kind of growing up and then watching them win those Super Bowls kind of tail end of his career. He still kind of wasn't as big of a, throwing threat as he was when they won those two Super Bowls, but just watching those highlights of him in his younger days, just
oh,
scrambling to one side and then launching it all the way across the field on a
hmm,
dot. And it was like, oh my gosh.
yeah, because they were just huge. Like you said, he just had like a
Hmm.
huge, huge arm. Like you had Joe Montana, like who obviously is great, and we love Joe Montana,
Right.
but he didn't have a cannon like those two guys,
Hmm.
though. Like you'd mentioned Dan Marino
Right.
and John Elway. So
Yeah, you just when you think of when I think of Joe Montana, it's just that Bill Walsh West Coast offense of just play action, roll out, throw it 15 to 20 yards down the field, and just kind of move the chains and
hmm,
efficient offense. And
and
Dan Marino and John Elway were just these gunslingers that would just
right,
throw it as far as they could. And it was just like, oh my gosh, like these are two
hmm,
different types of quarterbacks. But
Right.
That's what I remember most
Right.
about John Elway. Peyton Manning obviously is second on those lists. He only played there for those 4 years, but 58 games, 17,000 passing yards, and um, I had it pulled up. I can't remember what season that was. Let's see. It was they lost the Super Bowl that year, so 23 was the year that he kind of broke those records. He had
Or 2013.
2013.
Oh,
So
another guy, Demarius Thomas, was one of his
mhm.
receivers there, right? Okay. That was another guy I forgot to mention.
Yeah, so that year 2013 he threw for 5,400 yards, 55 touchdowns, and only 10 INTs,
Jesus.
which is crazy. I mean, you look at quarterback stats now in the league, people are leading the league in touchdown passes with like 38, 39. I think
Right.
Joe Burrow had 41 last year, which seemed like a lot, like he was just throwing touchdowns left and right. And
Mm-hmm.
then you look at this, and Peyton Manning's throwing 55 touchdowns in 16 games. It's like, holy cow. But from those
Yep.
years, I remember he had Demarius Thomas, Eric Decker was a
Oh,
really good
Decker.
receiver.
Yep.
He had that Thomas tight end on their team
Mm-hmm.
too. And then I think Wes Welker was on that team. Remember
Oh, okay.
Wes
Yeah.
Welker came from the
Nice.
Patriots, and he
Yep.
was a good little slot
Yep.
option for him. But
Heck yeah. They just kind of had it going on, huh?
they did, yeah. Davis, Terrell Davis, obviously the running back. He only played for 7 years, and so he's their all-time leading rusher with 7,600 rushing yards and 60 touchdowns. And I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent with Terrell Davis.
Okay.
And I don't know if you agree with me or not. You probably don't. I don't think a lot of people do, but I remember Terrell Davis when he was up. He was a first ballot Hall of Famer, and I remember when he got elected, it was kind of like my first initial thought was like, "Man, that's a little weird." Like I understand he has a regular season MVP, he has a Super Bowl MVP, but if you look at his stats, he only has 3 seasons of where he was decent.
Mm-hmm.
Two seasons where he was super good. He had 1,700 yards and 28 or over 2,000 yards.
Yeah.
But when he got elected as a first ballot Hall of Famer, and I think it was '07, it was kind of like, whoa, this is like the first time I remember seeing like a Hall of Famer with like mediocre stats because he only
Mm-hmm.
has 7,600 yards. And that kind of surprised me. And then that kind of put me off towards the Hall of Fame. And that's when I first like started noticing like, hey, they're kind of letting, to me, before that, it was like the Hall of Fame was like the like upper echelon of like players, like Mount
Right.
Rushmore players. And
Mm-hmm.
when Davis got elected, it was kind of like, man, I remember those 2 really good seasons that he had, but I don't remember anything else after that. So then I did like a little bit of deep dive, and it was like, yeah, he only played for 7 years, and 3 of those years, it was like 96, 97, 98, where they were really good,
Mm-hmm.
but that was it. And so I was like, man, he's kind of getting rewarded for those 3 really good years.
Yeah.
So that kind of surprised me, and I don't necessarily agree that he should be in the Hall of Fame. I don't know. That's just my kind of
Yeah.
soapbox on
No,
Terrell Davis.
absolutely. And now that you bring it up, I kind of think the same thing because
Mhm.
I didn't even realize that he played even 7 seasons. So
Mhm.
that does make sense because even before we went on, I was like, I'd say Terrell Davis is their leading rusher, but he didn't
Right.
really play that long. And so, no, you make a good point. And I actually agree with you, especially first ballot.
Mhm.
Like I could see later on,
Right.
after some other people are, get ahead of them and go ahead of them. But yeah, I agree with you for 3 seasons, and yeah, they were great seasons, but
Right.
that was it. And maybe it was almost like a feel bad thing because he got injured,
Mhm.
and it was career ending basically because he fought through injuries for those 2 seasons. They
Right.
kept thinking, oh, he's going to be back, he'll be the same, and kind of the Bo Jackson injury, wasn't it?
It was, well, he the year after they won the Super Bowl, so 98, 99 season, I believe he tore his ACL pretty
Mhm.
early in the year. And then the year after that, it was some sort of surgeries. And then I think he retired after that.
Yeah.
So the 3 years after his 3-year run, because his rookie year was pretty good too. I think he had just over 1,000 yards his rookie year. And then
Mhm.
he really took off. It was like 1,500 yards, 1,700 yards, and 2,000 yards in those 2 years that he won. Those 2 Super Bowls.
Right.
And then 97 season is the Super Bowl when he was the MVP of the Super Bowl. And I think the 98 season he was the AP player of the MVP of the year.
Okay.
So he's
Yeah.
got an MVP, he's got 2 Super Bowls, he's got a Super Bowl MVP, which
Yeah, that's good. But
it is.
yeah.
So you're basing that. You're not basing it off his career. I think he got in because of his postseason
Hmm.
credentials, which are amazing. But if you kind of compare stats, um, Saquon Barkley's been in the league for 7 years, and his stats are like very similar. So that's saying like right now, if Barkley retired right now, 5 years down the road, that he'd be a first ballot Hall of Famer. And I
Right.
mean, that's what you're kind of basing it off of.
Yeah, it
Maybe he
should
doesn't
be.
have the credentials as far as MVPs and offensive players. I think he has 2 offensive players of the year, where Barkley has 1 now. But
Yeah.
that was my little soapbox about
No, I
Terrell
like it.
Davis.
Yeah. No, those are a lot of good points. Yeah.
I don't know if anybody else agrees.
Because it
Maybe
should be iconic.
and that's
Yeah.
what I always held as far as being in the Hall of Fame before Terrell Davis got in. Like everybody that got nominated into the Hall of Fame is kind of like, man, these guys are
Right.
like what you're kind of holding your standards to. And then
Yeah.
when Terrell Davis got elected, it was kind of like, man, are we just kind of like holding the standards down now, or are we just basing it off of like just a short stint of somebody's career rather
Mhm.
than their entirety of their career?
Right.
Like, because I can make the argument of like, yeah, he had a great 3-year stint, but it's not Hall of Fame worthy stint. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
That's
No.
my little soapbox
No, I
about
like
Terrell
it.
Davis.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah.
Rod Smith is their all-time leading receiver. He played from 95 to 06, 183 games. He has 849 receptions, 11,387 yards. Going to the defensive side, all-time leading tackler is Dennis Smith. So their top 3 tacklers played in the same era. Dennis Smith, Carl Mackenberg, and Steve Atwater all played in the 80s to the 90s. And then all 3 of them have over 1,000 tackles combined.
Right.
So I don't know if that was part of I don't think that was the Orange Crush defense, was
No,
it?
that was during the, I want to say late 80s, early 90s run.
Yeah, because they all
So,
played in 81. So Dennis Smith, 81 to 94, Carl Mackenberg, 83 to 94, and then Atwater, 89 to 98. So
okay.
they all back end. Dennis Smith and Atwater were safeties, and then Carl Mackenberg was the linebacker. So the spine of their defense was pretty good.
Yeah.
Apparently their front part of their defense wasn't.
Right.
They weren't winning any Super Bowls.
Yep.
Von Miller was their all-time leading sacks getter. He has 110.5, and then Steve Foley played. He was a free safety. He's their all-time INT, 44 INTs. He played free safety. He played from 76 to 86, so he was kind of part of that.
He was part of the Orange Crush.
Yeah.
So, and what was his name? Steve Foley?
Steve Foley, yep.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Nice. Yeah, I actually took a guess at Champ Bailey. I wonder
Mhm.
where he was at, because he played a lot of good years there. But
It seemed like it, yeah.
so,
Maybe he was part of the grouping of like good safeties that don't have really good numbers because
nobody goes to him.
quarterbacks don't throw the
Right.
very much.
Avoid that side.
Right.
Yep.
And then kind of leads into today's defense that they have. They have the reigning defensive player of the year in Patrick Surtain, the second. So they're kind of continuing on that tradition of having really good defensive backs. And then just kind of leading into it, you kind of mentioned they've kind of been in a funk. They go through these eras of like really good quarterbacks with Elway. Then there was like a dip of just trying out people with Jay Cutler, Jake Plummer, Brian Greasy, and then they landed on Manning. And then Manning those 4 years, and ever since it's just been like Trevor Siemian and Brock Osweiler
And you can't forget old Sanchez when he went there too for a bit.
And then hopefully, like you mentioned, hopefully they've kind of landed on Bo Nix. Kind of seems like he's going to be a pretty good fit for the Sean Payton offense.
Yeah.
And kind of going back to Sean Payton being there, they went through a run too after Manning and John Fox of head coaches. They're trying to find like the offensive coordinators because they did the McDaniel stint with the Patriots for 2 years. Fangio. They had that offensive coordinator. Oh, he was with the Jets. He's the Jets head coach. He had that like famous press conference where his eyes were like really big. Adam Gase was the head coach with the Broncos for a couple of years, I think.
Yeah, McDaniels was there early.
I can't remember who was after Fangio.
I don't know. There was somebody right in between there, and I just seen it too, and I don't remember who it was.
It wasn't Vance Joseph, was it? I think Vance Joseph.
I think it was before. I
But
can look it up.
There kind of goes in like a stint. So once they find a good quarterback, it seems like they kind of stay on a head coach. And they did trade for Peyton too. Sean Payton was still technically under contract.
Have I been saying Gary Payton the whole time? I might have, but it's Sean Payton.
I
might have actually said that.
Yep.
I'm like, get the basketball guy Gary Payton in there. Yeah, he's their head coach.
Yep.
We're from the Sonics.
I can't remember who was there before him, but I do know that they traded for him, and I think they gave up like a first-round pick to acquire him.
Because he supposedly retired or something.
Retired, but they still retain his rights if he wants to go somewhere else.
Oh.
So they traded for him. I just can't remember. I remember it was a first-round pick, and it might have been some change, but
Yeah, they've gone through some head coaches, and I really like what they have going on there now.
Mm-hmm.
I really do. I like their defense. They led the season, 2024 season in sacks. And so, I mean, they were getting to the quarterback, and it was like sack by committee, too. It was 63 sacks, which is 9 more than the next closest team, which was the Ravens. And the Ravens had 54. But, I mean, yeah, they beat it by quite a bit. And that was really cool because it was like we were sitting there trying to talk about, okay, who is their big guy? Who's the one, racking up a lot of sacks here? But they had a guy, he had 13 and a half, and just wasn't anything where you're like, wow, that's crazy. I remember, a huge season out of these guys,
Right.
but
Yeah, we were talking before we came on. I was like, man, I just remember watching them a few times during the season because it seems like the Broncos and the Cowboys are on if you don't have Sunday ticket. I mean, those are the two teams you're going to watch because they're always on CBS and Fox.
mm-hmm.
Watching a little bit of the Broncos, DJ Jones was really about the only name on that front line that I remember just because he played for the Niners.
Right.
And then obviously Patrick Surtain, but everybody else, it was kind of like, man, these guys are playing really well. I just don't recognize any of the names.
Right.
So they've done a really good job. They've got Zach Allen out of free agency from Arizona. They got DJ Jones from San Francisco from free agency. Really, they're returning everybody besides middle linebacker and safety, and then they filled it with two really good players, in my opinion, with Dre Greenlaw and Talahanga Hufanga. So those are the only two spots that they replaced. Everybody else is returning, and I just think that defense is going to be better under Vance Joseph.
Which linebacker left? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
Because it wasn't Bonito, was it? Because he's the one who led him in sacks. So it seems like they just have really good blitz packages. Because they've got, I mean, their linebackers are their top. They've got 2 linebackers that are leading them in sacks.
Right.
And I know people are probably like, well, yeah, that makes sense. But it really doesn't. I know they could be edge rushers too, but I'm just saying, like, mostly it's your defensive ends and stuff like that. But I think these guys are true linebackers.
Right.
And so I think they just run a really good defensive blitz package.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty cool. And their pickup of Dre Greenlaw is so sad to see him leave. And
I know.
If he comes back healthy and he's the same player, watch out, because this defense only got so much better.
Yeah, we got a little bit of a glimpse during that Seattle game I think it was Seattle. Mm-hmm. Was it Seattle that he came back, or was it the Rams?
I want to say it was Seattle. I think you were right. But
he played only a half, and then he had some sort of injury, and I think they were just more precautionary with him, with his Achilles. But that first half that he played, you could tell it was just a totally different defense. He brings the energy. He's the energy guy. He backs it up with his play, too. So he just elevates everybody else's game, I think. And then Hufanga's just flying around. I think that's good that they already have Brandon Jones in there as a safety, and then they got bringing Hufanga in. Hufanga's a little bit better down in the box, a mover guy. He kind of reminds me of like a diet version of Troy Polamalu.
Right.
He's not as much of an impact player, but he likes to come down, and he can come down and hit. So that'll be good for Vance Joseph's defense. Then offensively, they bring back everybody. They upgraded at tight end with Evan Ingram, which will be good, I think, for Bo Nix. Because we've kind of talked about in kind of the draft process of, they need more weapons for Bo Nix on that offense besides Cortland Sutton. They still have Marvin Mims. They got Devin Vele, Troy Franklin, but those are all kind of, to me, Mims played a little bit, pretty good role besides Cortland Sutton. But I think bringing Evan Ingram in as an actual receiving tight end and a bigger body threat, kind of in that intermediate middle of that field. Besides, Cortland Sutton's obviously your true X, where he's going to kind of stretch the field.
Right.
So I think that's good. Where they think they can upgrade a little bit is probably their running back room. I think it was kind of towards the end, there was kind of running back by committee with McLaughlin, Williams, and Audric Estime from Notre Dame.
Yep.
So as far as the draft goes, I know they're drafting 20, but I can see them bringing in maybe another threat as far as a receiver. They're all pretty young because they drafted Mims in 23 and then Bailey last year in 24, but they're all kind of later round picks. So maybe I could see them going if that Omari and Hampton is on the board, that running back for North Carolina.
Yep.
Maybe it's just bringing in a solid guy who can be a 3-down back for you rather than just a running back by committee.
Oh, I like that. Yep.
So I it's not by comparison, but you think of the offenses that Sean Payton had in New Orleans. He had a stable workhorse in a 3-down back with Alvin Kamara. So maybe he's kind of looking to bring a more solid running back in there to brother, so he's not just bringing in, Audric Estime in short yardage situations and then bringing him out and then bringing McLaughlin in on your first and second down type of situation. So
Yeah, no, I like that because they're Javonte Williams, who at times seemed like he was the guy, but he only averaged like 3.7, so that's not very good. We're looking, and Estime was 4.1. Yeah, they need some guys that can really kind of carry that. They need a guy. I was thinking that, and then before you mentioned Ingram, I was thinking tight end for sure.
yeah,
But Ingram is a good receiving tight end, but if he doesn't pan out, I mean, if there's a good tight end there, let's say, because I don't think Tyler Warren's going to be there. I think he's, they've got him graded pretty high. He's like a Kyle Pitts type of pick. So I think he could be coming out in the top 10.
yeah.
But who was that other tight end too?
There's that Colston Loveland from Michigan,
Right.
which would be a good. He's more of like a split out tight end too. He's not an inline tight end.
Right.
So which it kind of match up with Evan Ingram too, which would be good complementary
Right.
to him.
So you could still go tight end depending on who's there, and then maybe either way, I think that you're going to be able to get a quality guy in the second round.
Yeah.
And those, but yeah, I totally agree with you until you mentioned Ingram, and I still think Ingram still has a lot of tread on those tires. I don't know if Jacksonville was a great place for him, but I do know that he's fast, and when he is on, like he's had a couple of good seasons, but he's been kind of, I think the problem is I think he had really high expectations too, and he come right out and had one hell of a good season his first year, and hasn't met that yet. But I think he probably, they're going to be able to use him. I think their tight end who had the most catches before this last season was like 19 catches, was the highest, receptions for tight end position. That's not very good. And they had like 4 different guys catching. So yeah, no, I like the tight end spot, and then I think definitely they're in a good spot. I think they could probably get they're not going to get the top guy because Genty's going to go before then, but they could get the next best running back.
Yeah, I like that because I was thinking of other weapons too. Maybe that Luther Burton, that receiver from Missouri, could be another pick. But maybe they like the receivers that they have. They didn't do anything in free agency to bring any other receivers in. The only thing that they did was bring in Evan Ingram. So I can see them staying with those receivers that they have. Maybe they just have made a good connection with Bo Nix and coming into his second year. What's going to make this team go is that offensive line. I really liked how their offensive line came together last year. They just got some dudes, man. They got that Bowles and McGlinchey as tackles, and then they got that Quinn Mears, which by everything that I've read, he's one of the top guards in the league right now.
Yeah.
And then they got that Ben Powers. He was a free agent from Baltimore, I think, last year. So they returned their whole offensive line, which was really good last year. Which, you're hoping for the development of Bo Nix to take that next step. Just continuity in this whole offense with Sean Payton being there. Everybody's coming back. You're adding weapons with Evan Ingram in the passing game, and with the draft, you can just kind of pile on some of those more athletic guys if you want to add more speed to your offense or more explosiveness to your offense. Because I think Cortland Sutton can take the top off of a defense. I think there's just not any like home run hitters I don't see on this team really, as far as like just taking something like maybe like just a quick, slant or even a 5-yard out route to the house.
Right.
So maybe they do that through the running game, through the passing game, whatever they do. So you always kind of seen those offenses with Sean Payton and the Saints as being like explosive with Drew Brees as something that's not going to take it like a shorter route to the house. So maybe they try to find something like that in the draft somewhere later down the line as more like a more explosive player.
And Sean Payton is probably still kind of looking for that. Who's that running back he had in with the Saints? He still plays.
Kamara?
Kamara.
Yeah.
Did you already mention him?
Yeah.
Did you? Yeah, somebody like you said like that. Somebody that's just going to be able to do it all.
Right.
So, and that's definitely his type. So yeah, I totally agree with that 100%. And yeah, I don't know, man. I as much as I'm, we're bombarded by Bronco fans up here in Wyoming.
Mhm.
And as much as that's kind of a pain, this team, I mean, they came out and they did really good. They surprised the hell out of me. And I was really surprised at how well their defense played. I
Mhm.
know they got thumped a couple of times. I think the Buccaneers, did they get them or did they? There was a team, I don't remember that. I was like, dude, this defense is going to rock them. And they didn't show up
Yeah.
so well. And and I know going into that wild card playoff game against the Bills, I did not like the matchup for the Bills at all. I was
Mhm.
like, this team gets after the quarterback and they're good at it. And I was, kind of just like, I was not excited about this matchup. And the Bills ended up handling business and
Right.
they did it just fine. But going into it, I was, this team, because when they show up and they play defense, it was, if they're getting after that quarterback, it's over,
Right.
and they showed that they could dominate. And Bo Nix was kind of that. He's that quarterback. He was that young guy who was like, a little bit of kind of devil may hay. You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? Just kind of go out there and make plays, and he did. And it was kind of a bad matchup. I felt like because the Bills defense wasn't playing well,
Right.
and it's kind of crazy because it was like they were the number 7 seed and the Bills were number 2. So I'm sitting there going, I don't like this matchup just because I feel like they're that good of a team. I feel like they're kind of a underrated team.
Right.
So
Hey, yeah, I like what you said there. They kind of flew underneath the radar. They don't have those big names. I mean, obviously they had Patrick Surtain win the Defensive Player of the Year, but
mhm.
offense and defense, there's not a whole lot of household names that you can go like. They don't have a big time edge rusher name. They don't have like a Miles Garrett or a Bosa or
Yep.
Max Crosby or even a Chris Jones or something like that on their defense. So they do have Patrick Surtain, but he can kind of get lost sometimes because he plays only a half of a field. So
Mhm.
if the quarterback's not targeting his side of the field, he kind of gets lost in the throughout the game. But even on
Right.
offense, I mean, they still have Cortland Sutton, but I mean, like you said, Marvin Mims and Devon Bailey and even their offensive line. I know they traded for Mike McGlinchey. That was kind of a big signing for them a couple years ago from the 49ers, but
Right.
everybody else is kind of homegrown. I mean, they drafted Bowles, they drafted Quinn Mears, they drafted their center Wattenberg. Uh, Bo Nix last year was kind of a surprise for me when they picked him up. It was kind of like I didn't know if he had like a first round grade on him. Everything that I've read was like he was more of like a second round,
Mhm.
third round type of guy. And then when Sean Payton picked him, everybody was kind of like, "Ooh, this is maybe a Sean Payton kind of pick. This is like the guy that he wanted." And I was like, "Man, I really didn't see it when he was at Oregon."
Right.
But I think just throughout the year, he kind of got better at those first couple games. I think it was just more of like, "Ooh, this I don't know if this is going to work out," but he just
Right.
slowly but surely got better. And then, like you said, towards the end of the year, when they went into that playoff game, that was like the talking point with everybody. It was just like, this could be the game, like the most upset worthy game of the playoffs
Right.
because of the way the Broncos were playing. The Bills had just came off like a really bad loss a couple weeks ago, or really bad showing against the Patriots, where they
Patriots.
really couldn't move the ball, and it was just like, "Whoa,
Yeah.
they're not going to the playoffs really well." But first, I think the first drive, the Broncos went in there and they scored a touchdown and made it 7-0. It was like,
Yep.
all right, here we go. And then after that, it was just domination by
Yeah.
the Bills.
And it was James Cook.
It was, yeah.
It was that show, and I think they kind of exposed a little bit of that defense where
Hmm.
they're like, when somebody just runs it right at us, we're not that great, which is I think why they went and picked up the big hitters, which
Right.
is why Greenlaw and Hufanga
Yep.
come in. And
Yeah.
I think, DJ Jones isn't a guy who's going to get you sacked.
Hmm.
He's just going to fill up that middle.
Right.
And I think that's why they re-signed him as well. So
Yep.
yeah, they got exposed in that playoff game a little bit, but still, I like this defense. And like you said, Patrick Surtain, he had 4 picks. I think he returned one for a touchdown,
Hmm.
and that doesn't seem like great stats because you'd think a cornerback who gets it is going to have higher interceptions or whatever, a lot more. But really, the dude shut down guys.
Yeah.
Like I mean, I'm glad they picked. There was guys that were definitely with him that were that they could have went with too for defense player of the year, but I'm kind of glad they picked him
Hmm.
because it wasn't a stat heavy pick, if that makes sense.
Right.
So it was like, all right, so you see what he does, you see what he contributes, and if they're not getting thrown to, that means something.
Hmm.
Because if you make one side of the field, no, we're not going that way. We're not going to go to our best receiver. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think they're going to be scary. I going into last year, I agree with you 100%. I didn't know about Bo Nix. I think they picked him up pretty high too, like number 10
Hmm.
or something like that. I think they picked fairly high again. But yeah, I think coming into this one, I don't think I'm going to be surprised by them, and I think I'm going to
Right.
pick them probably within the top 15 of teams because I think they're going to be probably another playoff team, so probably in my top 14. So yeah, I don't know, and I like it. There's a lot of playmakers out there. You got wide receivers out
Mhm.
there. You've got some tight ends and running backs, and I think you're right. I don't think they need to address um, the trenches, which is big because then you can kind of take some chances on guys. So
Right.
all right, yeah, no, that was a good episode. I really like the fact that we finally talked about a team that we didn't really think needed to address trenches
Mhm.
again. I think the last one we actually talked about was the Eagles. And that was
Right.
like right off the bat,
Mhm.
because I don't think this team has many holes
It doesn't.
on either. So
Nope.
yeah, and I'm sure they feel pretty free. I didn't see how many draft picks they have. I don't. I think it's at least 7 or 8 from what I did see it. I just don't remember. I think it was 7 or 8. So
Mhm.
I think they're going to be doing just fine going into it, and it'll be kind of cool to see where they end up going with the draft. But okay, yeah. So next week we will be doing 3 episodes. We're going to be doing the Buccaneers episode, which will be the last of the playoff teams, and then I think after that it goes into I want to say Seattle. I think is one of them, and then I don't remember the other one, but we'll be doing I think it's this was yeah 19 is the Bucks, then we'll be doing 18, 17.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but you can catch all these. Like I said, we're on YouTube now. You can catch these on Podbean. Go check us out on iTunes. And yeah, I mean, yeah, we know like we got the camera here. We're still
Mhm.
getting used to it ourselves. So yeah, but if you listen to us on Podbean or on um, on a podcast, then yeah, go check us out on YouTube. Tell us what you think. We're going to be upgrading our studio a little bit here to make it a little more
Mhm.
friendly, but yeah, we appreciate you listening, and we'll catch you next time.